and they're telling me I'm live. Just waiting for it to show up on my own. Hey there! Okay, I needed to reboot my own Twitch stream. I never believe it till I see myself on screen. Good morning, West Coast. Good afternoon, East Coast. Good evening to all our friends in Europe. Welcome, I am Lane Nooney. I'm a computer and video game historian in the Media Studies Department at New York University. I'm also one of the co-founders and the managing editor of ROMchip, a journal of game histories, the host for today's talk. I shepherd the journal alongside my talented collaborators and co-editors, Henry Lowood, David Parisi, Soraya Murray, and Logan Brown. Give a shout out in the chat if you're here. And I'm so excited to have everyone joining us here today for what is not just the latest in a series of Twitch talks we host called ROMchip Presents, but also the very first event launching our third annual fundraising season. So who are we and why do we need money? I know we've got a lot of friends and fans in the audience, folks who've been following us for a long time, but in case you are new here to ROMchip, we are, as we like to say, an open access hybrid audience online venue for the publication of game history. What does that mean? That means that as a venue, we develop, solicit, edit, and publish work across a range of formats. We've got traditional peer-reviewed articles, interviews and oral history, short essays, translations, and they deal with everything from video games to board games, analog games, sports, and play. We are an open access journal. We have no paywall, no advertising, no logins, no predatory publishing model. You don't have to pay anything ever to read the research published inside of ROMchip. Our authors keep their copyrights. We are trying to model a very different kind of future for research publishing. And lastly, we call ourselves hybrid audience because we are trying to create a big tent around game history. Actually, I would say we are not trying, we are. We are a place where you can have rigorous historical engagement with as many folks as possible who want to do that work. So part of our mission is that you shouldn't need a PhD to be able to write for or interview for or read ROMchip. And so these Twitch talks we do, called ROMchip Presents, are an extension of that mission to bring historical work to you through the power of live streaming. This is also the first talk in a series of 3 that we're hosting this fundraiser season. 2 Fridays from now, February 6th, same time, we'll be hosting researcher and OG ROMchip co-founder Rayford Gwynns for a talk on his new book, King Pong, How Atari Bounced Across Markets to Make Millions. And then a week later, Friday, February 13th, we're hosting Carlin Wing for a talk about her new book, Bounce, Balls, Walls, and Bodies in Games and Play. And all these talks will be leading up to our third annual 12-hour Twitch fundraiser we'll be having right here, February 21st. Put it in your calendar. We'll also be posting links for how to get on the newsletter so that you can make sure you don't miss an update on any of this cool upcoming content. And why do we want to make sure you don't miss it? Because, folks, we need your support. We are able to be radically open access and super inclusive because no one owns us. But that also means no one pays our bills. ROMchip is entirely funded by people who just love game history. We're proud of our editorial independence and proud of the big tent we're creating. And we're also proud of the fact that as of our 2025 audit, shows that 90% of our donations go to paying people, not platforms. Our copy editor, our web developer, freelance writers, and tech specialists. That's a pretty damn good ROI, I think. So our goal on February 21st is to raise at least $7,000. That's our tier 1 goal, which will help us continue bringing you all this incredible work. We've got a whole day of game streaming content with folks like Jason Scott from the Internet Archive. Rob Dubbin is going to be speed running how to make a game in ZZT with input from the chat. Patrick Lemieux is back on the modular synth. Whit Powell will be making Bally Astrocade glitch art and so much more. We're going to be giving away books from UChicago and MIT Press. It's going to be very fun, very stupid, and you're going to love it. So if that sounds awesome and you can't wait to join in the fun, then the great news is you can help us right now. At this moment, we are just under 20% of our 7K goal with 29 days to go. So this time last year, we were at 25%. So I'm just saying 2026 needs to step it up. Momentum matters a lot. So the closer we get to 7K before February 21st, the sooner we can just unlock higher fundraising tiers, which makes it possible for us to do more cool stuff. And as a bonus, everyone who donates right now gets the kind of early donor status. You'll have your name on our website. We'll send you a little ROMchip swag when the fundraiser's over to thank you. If you want to know more about our fundraising mission, our full schedule, or just get to donating, links are in the chat. You can go to donate.romchip.org. Okay. And with all that out of the way, thank you for your patience. It's my honor and pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Cameron Kunzelman. Cameron is a writer, critic, and scholar whose work exemplifies everything we value at ROMchip. Cameron moves fluidly across academic research, games journalism, and public-facing criticism. He's written for Waypoint, Pace, and Polygon. He co-hosts long-form critical insight podcasts like Ranged Touch and Game Studies Study Buddies. His work models a kind of open sharing and circulation of ideas across new media forms that we think should be celebrated. Cameron is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies and Theater at Mercer University, and is the author of 2 books with a third on the way. His first, The World is Born from Zero, offers a philosophical reading of how science fiction games generate speculative thinking. His third, Cumulative Upkeep, is a forthcoming history of Magic the Gathering. I'm sure a lot of people in the chat are going to be excited about this. But today we're here to talk about his second book, just released this past November, Everything is Permitted on Assassin's Creed, a sharp and, sorry for the pun, deeply engaging look at one of gaming's most ambitious and enduring franchises and the cultural and philosophical ideas that structure it. Cameron, we are thrilled to have you, and the floor is yours.
Yay, it's me. I'm my center of the screen now. I'm the protagonist of reality. It feels great. It feels good. I just want to thank everyone involved for doing this. Lane, obviously for reaching out and doing this, and everyone involved with ROMchip. I've thought that ROMchip has been a breath of fresh air for a very long time, and not to start this talk with a little bit of friction. But over the past 2 years in particular, I've become extremely disenchanted with the state of large-scale academic publishers of the billion-dollar plus variety. And every single time someone asks me, well, what is the other model? What is the thing if you don't want to be involved in those massive, huge corporations? And look, shout out university presses. I love them. They are my best friend, all of them. But it's those really, really big publishers that I find pretty stressful, and the amount of labor we as academics put into those things that are expropriated is just massive to me. And so anytime anyone asks me, well, what is the other model? I point out ROMchip every single time. It's very inspirational. I don't want to soft launch it right now. I am also working on an additional thing to route around some of the whirlpool effect that pulls in academic labor and delivers nothing to it. I'm trying to route around that as well, and ROMchip has been something that we've been looking at a lot as a model for thinking about that. So I just want to thank everyone, and also just thank ROMchip as a thing, as a journal and an organization, and a series of thoughts. I'm going to share my screen now. Not toggle the chat. Oh, and thanks for everyone who's in the chat for being here. I appreciate everyone for doing that. Oh, wait a minute. What is this? Oh, I think I've shared the wrong thing. I think I shared the donation page for ROMchip. Wait a minute. Donate.romchip.org. You can go there right now, and you can hold on. Wait a sec. Yeah, I think you can. I think you can go there right now, and you could donate money to ROMchip. So if you think you might notionally enjoy what I'm about to talk about, please go in, throw $5 in the pot. It's a big deal. And there's going to be the big fundraiser. Just repeating Lane here, but Saturday, February 21st, 11 to 11. So be here. Okay, but we'll go to the other thing I'm doing. All right. I had a couple options when Lane reached out about this to think about how to do a talk about this book. I worked on Everything is Permitted for a pretty long time. I think I actually found my earliest notes about working on the book, and they were from 2014, I want to say. And I've been talking to people about it and trying to figure out the shape of something like it for almost that long. Brian Taylor, academic or not academic, game critic, Brian Taylor, and I have been exchanging messages in emails and things like that about Assassin's Creed for a very, very long time. And constantly, Brian is still messaging me. And so when I really thought about doing the book and thinking through it and working with the University of Minnesota Press on it, it went through a few different stages. And I think all of those stages and all of the ideas I had beforehand had to do with the big problem, which is that Assassin's Creed is a franchise. There are, at that time when I really started thinking seriously, there are more than a dozen games. Now there's even more. So that question of bigness or scale, or what does Assassin's Creed do, or how do you get your hands around it in order to figure out the shape of it, around the big polyhedron? How do you do that? Is kind of the issue. So I think this talk is mostly going to be about method, and it'll allow me to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff I'm working on, which is I'm eternally trying to round home on this book about Magic the Gathering, which is very difficult to figure out how to kind of do. I mean, I've written a lot of it. I would say I've written the majority of it, but it's running into some of the same issues I had around everything is permitted. So I'll get to that in the end, and then I have another thing I'm working on, this big notional project afterward that I'll preview a little bit toward the end. I hope everyone's okay with that. And also, just want to say too, Lane is taking questions in the chat. So if you got a question, something comes up, just kick it in there, and then we'll talk about the end. My goal is to talk for about 20-30 minutes, somewhere in between there, and have plenty of time for Q&A. So just heads up. So yeah, so I wrote this book, Everything is Permitted, on Assassin's Creed. It had a really interesting pathway to publication. I'd had this notion of doing almost a popular press style book a long time ago, like I said, and I just kind of accrued notes. I compiled spreadsheets of interviews to go back and look at, and looking through my files and documents, I realized, I have like several distinct moments of what the shape was supposed to be before I got here. And it turned into writing a proposal for the franchise series that Jerry Canavan and Ben Robertson are doing at Minnesota. And then as I worked on it, it got bigger maybe than what my initial pitch was, what my idea was, and it kind of popped out of that series. And so it ended up becoming this: Everything is Permitted on Assassin's Creed. I would hold it up or have like a 3D image of it, or take a picture of it. But I realized I took all my copies that I have to my office. Now people have pointed out to me, and I'll say this so that other people don't have to do this themselves. I've been alerted after the publication that it does kind of seem like this is a romance novel, or perhaps a pornographic book, because there's this everything is permitted, and then there's this kind of flare of bed sheets going on here. And I think it's mostly meant to be evocative of a kind of airiness or an encompassingness. I like the cover image, but if you want to buy a copy and then tell someone it's a romance novel and then give it to them and trick them into reading it, that's a-okay. I guess another question here is, why would you ever want to write an academic book? It's troublesome all the way through, up and down. You have to do all this kind of weird work to legitimate yourself to lots of different audiences, some of whom you'll never interact with. And something that's really interesting about writing about Assassin's Creed is you have to kind of choose what domain you want to address it in, at least notionally. Certainly in the way that I was trained to write academic work and academic books. So the idea is to say, is it about history? Well, yeah, in some ways, I think Assassin's Creed is about history. The vast majority of the work that's been done on Assassin's Creed often is engaged in history and historical legitimacy and historical storytelling, all these different things. Is it about the 3D open world? Well, yeah, it is kind of about the 3D open world and 3D open world design and the way that we think about those things in relationship to one another, and the kind of post GTA 3 universe that was inaugurated in that generation, right? So this is Ubisoft doing that kind of thing. Is it something that's about franchises, or is it something that is about scale, which is to say Ubisoft is developing these games using studios from all over the world who are all interacting with one another via different pipelines. You got people flying all over the world to direct and collate the work from the various different studios that touch each title. And then you have the entire editorial team who are trying to figure out how to make this a large, coherent set of intellectual property, almost like a deck of cards, right? It has its different forms. You can kind of deal it out all over the different media forms. And so, this kind of question of why would you ever want to write an academic book? I think I stumbled into it because I thought that I would be able to, and people who read the book can tell me if they think I'm successful. I think it worked out. I thought writing a big academic book about Assassin's Creed would allow me to kind of shuffle a lot of different approaches to big franchises together. And so the way that the book shook out and the way it's formed and the way it works is that there are some big idea chapters at the beginning. So there's a chapter about the animus and interfacing. There's a chapter about conspiracy, which I'll talk a little bit more in depth here in just a minute. And there are these big approaches, right? And then the second half of the book are all about individual entries or clusters of entries in the franchise and how they present Assassin's Creed to us in different ways. So there's a chapter about playing the Templars. What does it mean to play a whole franchise that tells you there's good guys and bad guys, and then have a couple games where the bad guys are the ones that you're supposed to be playing as? How do you change the way you do that? So I use that as an entryway into thinking about ethics in games and how games present us with a particular kind of visualized or visual narrativized ethics that doesn't ever ask us to make choices, doesn't ask us to do any of the things that morality in games would normally do. There's no light side, dark side points in those Assassin's Creed games. But at the same time, you do have this kind of ethical position toward it. I don't think we're meant to feel good when key characters are killed by our protagonist in Assassin's Creed Rogue, for example. So what's going on there, right? So I thought an academic book would give me the ability to not just tell a story about Assassin's Creed, not just kind of narrate what happened in the world around the development of this franchise, but more specifically to approach it from a lot of different angles and then kind of create a composite of that. If in academia we used to talk about a parallax view from a guy I don't care to talk about too much, maybe this is like the infinite parallax, the bug's eye view, right? How can you see it from all these different angles? The other part of this is really hard, and I think is notable for if you're not an academic, if you're not in game studies, and even if you are, the video game scholarship is actually kind of weird compared to a lot of other disciplines. Certainly, the disciplines that I've been involved in, pinging back and forth in the universe of communication studies and media philosophy and all the other things I've been aligned with, science fiction studies. These little sectors of disciplines and quasi-disciplines that I've interacted with. Video games are quite odd, and video game scholarships is quite odd because you have to come out the gate when you write about video games academically by making a kind of allegiance with a given discipline. So we've been doing Game Studies Study Buddies, our podcast that's about academic works of game studies for 5 years or 6 years or something like that, a long time. And something that's been really interesting to see. We read a book a month, every single month. We've never missed a month. So we've read 70 or 80 something things. We've watched a few things too, but for the most part, we've just been reading books, and they're overwhelmingly things that are published as video game scholarship. And the thing that's really notable is that in that work, either classical or more recent, you kind of have to make this opening salvo of here is where I'm aligning myself with a given discipline, right? So you have to claim, am I a historian? You have to claim, am I engaging this as a literary text? Am I engaging this through media studies, right? In the kind of different ways that media studies thinks about its object. And that's normal. That's academic work. You have to make a claim about where you're seeing the world from. But video game scholarship is, I I think it's at a disadvantage sometimes because even though we've got a solid 30 years of work to ping off of and engage with and think about ourselves as a discipline, it's still relatively uncommon, I would say, for books about video games to claim video game scholarship as their only background, which is to say, it always seems like another discipline sneaks in there as the fundamental true grounding discipline. Right or wrong, good or bad, I don't know one way or the other. But it does mean when you're writing about something like a big franchise and you're writing about something like Assassin's Creed that has all these different angles to it, that was actually really hard for me to do. I couldn't really say, and the closest I got was saying that this is a franchise studies book, and I guess it is. I mean, it does need that work to go. But it meant that I had to kind of jump back and forth between different disciplines from chapter to chapter in order to understand and to position the kind of stuff that was happening in Assassin's Creed within a broader context. So reading everything is permitted. I mean, I don't know. I've read it many times, and sometimes I read it and I go, this is good. Who wrote this? You know, like I think everyone who writes an academic book eventually like looks at it and goes, whoever wrote this was really smart. I wonder where that person went. You know, like I think it's I don't know. I've talked to several people that have that experience. But it means that every book is kind of reading Assassin's Creed through a different discipline. And so it took a lot of really weird work to get to a place where I felt like I could confidently make some claims about Assassin's Creed engaging with theories of narrative and theories of history, or Assassin's Creed engaging with theories of the interface and where that went and where it came from. And that means going across communicatory regimes. The book, if part of the issue is the method thing I just talked about, where are you coming from? What discipline are you engaged with? How does that work? Whatever. The other feedback that I got while working on the book, and something that really came up a lot, I would say, in the copy editing process, great copy editor, great feedback on that. This is not a complaint about that, but I wrote it very specifically for people who listen to Game Study Buddies. You know, that was my kind of model audience, which is to say people who are not necessarily academics, although a lot of academics listen to the show, and I'm thankful that they do that, but I wouldn't say that's primarily our audience in terms of numbers. A lot of people assign it to students. Well, a lot of students are not disciplinary experts, but they might be interested. They are definitely interested in listening to the show. They might be interested in reading the book. But the vast majority of feedback that I get from people who listen to Game Study Buddies and the other stuff we do at Range Touch is that they're just people who overwhelmingly have some sort of degree. That's the vast majority of our audiences, and enjoyed the intellectual stimulation of being involved in an intellectual community. I mean, that's the real benefit of being in a classroom, I think. That is the real benefit of being an educator for me. It's why I get up and go to work every day. It's not because of committee meetings. Sorry to report. I go to work every day and I enjoy it because I get to work with people who are at least nominally invested in the intellectual project of thinking about the problems of the world. And I find that very interesting. I mean, it works every day. There's not a day that I don't find that process, even if the exact thing I'm working on isn't my favorite thing, or the intellectual trajectory I'm helping people work through, or the material that I'm doing, even if those aren't my favorite, the act of teaching, the act of talking through these things and working through them and getting people to engage with them, that's the thing I like the most about teaching in academia, just period. And so I tried to write the book in such a way that it was doing that and continuing to do that. And so bouncing back and forth between, you know, the chapter, for example, there's a chapter on Black Flag and the way that the philosopher, theorist, whatever you want to call him, Michel Foucault, writes about the pirate ship in heterotopias, right? So these places that are multiple things all at one time. And in that chapter, I'm bouncing back and forth between like very normal human beings conversation, very regular speech, I would say, about what that is like and how the pirate ship is functioning and what it feels like to play these games and how you see it. And then also this, you know, very high language work of French theory of the time. And I hope that kind of works in the thing. So if we're thinking about discipline at the beginning, right, from what position do you speak or claim authority for the argument you're making? For me, what really mattered in the writing of the book, and again, the thing that ended up, I think, having the most friction in the editorial and copy editing process was how do you maintain that while also engaging in a way that people want to read and have a good time with. And I think that's, again, not to continue boosting up ROMchip here, right? But I think ROMchip really, really accomplishes that both on these streams and making sure that they're available, but also just in the writing of the journal. I think that it's something that's really important. So that's all to say. The book is hard because I had to deal with a bunch of disciplines. How do I make these things useful, accessible to both me and an audience? And then how do you talk about it? How do you say it to people in such a way that you get to maintain the specificity and the value and the precision of the theory, which I find very helpful, while also making sure that it's not alienating. Who knows? Additionally, you got to deal with all these different things. Now, notably, this is what disciplines do for us, right? They allow us to say we care about this thing, but not the other. I try, and everything is permitted, to deal with text, like what is the thing in front of us? How does it speak to itself? Trying to deal with images. What do you actually see, and how does that communicate? Trying to think about sound. My weakest work across the board, I feel very confident about that, is thinking about sound. I'm just not very good at it. I don't think I can hear well enough to have good distinctions being made, and I also just don't have a good theoretical language. But to be responsive to the thing, you kind of need to think about that stuff. And then the thing that game studies loves to engage with, to the point of fetishization, and I'm a part of this too. We're all a part of it. If you write about games, you end up in this zone every time. It's our disciplinary history. It's just where we are. It's interaction and decision making, right? How do you touch the thing and how do you do it? You can read The World is Born from Zero, my book on science fiction games, to just see me going long on it. You can also read all the footnotes in that where I claim to be a international billiards expert. So, this is a really, I don't know why this is such a low quality screenshot. We were talking about the snipping tool earlier when we were setting up for this. I guess this is a real victim of my snipping tool usage at some point, but I just didn't look at it very closely a minute ago. This is a screenshot from, I think, the trailer for Valhalla, but maybe not. Maybe this is from actual gameplay. But I just have this up here to think about all those things I just said, right? So we've got the textual elements here that are instructing you on how you engage with the world. So we've got the patrol blend here, and we've also got the Canterbury stuff at the top that has all of this resonance to it. There's this kind of historical angle to the game, engaging with all those different things. Oh yeah, and I've got the YouTube like precise seeking thing in here for some reason. Truly like bottom tier screenshot. Sorry, apologies to everyone involved. But you end up with the textual element here. You're ending up with the image itself, which is, you can see in the upper right hand corner. You've got guards on the walls. You can see on the right there the climbable scaffolding. You can see the gate that you're going through that's really tight, with guards in front that are labeled with the little interactable symbols that let you know who they are. So it encourages you to blend. You've got what looks like a little runnable wall pathway over here to the left too. All this kind of stuff, right? So that's the image part. There's sound. There's probably a bunch of bells ringing. Valhalla is a game where just bells ring all the time for some reason. And then there's the actual interactable part, right? So it's the making decisions underneath, from a video game studies perspective here, right? Theoretically, if you take this angle, and I say this begrudgingly because I do take this angle quite often, but I don't know if I'm always happy about it. Beneath all of what I just said, underneath what you can see, underneath what you can read, is the expectation of interaction and prompting for interaction. That scaffold is over there, and you can see it, and your eye is guided to it from looking at this gate head on, right? It's in your POV, so that that's a route that's available to you. And there's a reason why the sky is cut open there really easily, and there's a tree on the left. This has been level designed, all this kind of stuff, right? So it's a wildly, I've used the word composite already, but it's a real thing to think about when you write about games and try to think about how to engage with it. Is where do you put your thumb on the scale? Where do you say the truth is, or where do you say the most important work is? Or where do you think the most valuable use of your time is? And Everything is Permitted tries to do it all. And who knows if I succeed. So the thing that I end up doing in order to do all of that, right? To say, how do I talk about text? How do I talk about image? How do I talk about all these different pieces? the way that I did that was by saying, okay, well, then there's concepts. And if I can find concepts in these games that bridge across all of these things, then I can actually try to talk comprehensively about the game, not just about the interactability, not just about the historical content, not just about the game's use of race, for example, which is one of the places that people have written a lot of really great work on Assassin's Creed. And so I tried to look for big concepts. So one is, precursor species slash ancient aliens, which is a big part of it. One is the interface, and another one is conspiracy. So I want to talk just for a few minutes. Yeah, right on time. Just for a few minutes about conspiracy, and then we'll cut for Q&A. In the background of game studies, and if we're thinking longer than the 30-year durée, if we're thinking back to the ancient times of game studies, there's probably 2 books that get cited the most, and then a third that should be but isn't. So there's Huizinga's Homo Ludens, which makes an argument about the cultural qualities of games and the cultural layering of games. Games are culture, and culture is game, and the way that they interleave with one another tells you something about the shape of the world that you're in and the shape of the culture that you're in. You can listen to Michael Lutz and I go long on this over on Game Study Buddies, but it's the general shape of it. And so when we're talking about what games do and how they function within game studies, people often like to go back here. And of course, there's the Calois, kind of a French theory person in the Acéphale group with people like Georges Bataille and Colette Pignon, all those different folks, breaks with them, and then writes Man Playing Games. And so Man Playing Games, similar kind of work. Calois notably trained as an Orientalist, so it's very comparative. There are cultures that do X, there are cultures that do Y. What does it mean for the difference? And that's another one of our big things. And of course, a book that I'm always trying to champion and that Michael Lutz, we like a lot. We've co-written a piece that's about why we should take this game seriously but book seriously as a theoretical text for in the kind of deep history of game studies. CLR James's Beyond a Boundary, in which he talks about growing up in Trinidad and about his relationship between watching and playing cricket and then the development of his literary and cultural perspective on the world and his perspective on labor in the post-colonial moment and politics. All these things get interleaved together because it's really kind of a theoretically oriented autobiography of himself. And the reason I'm bringing all 3 of these up is there's something really deep in game studies that fundamentally holds that games and culture are a double articulation of the same phenomenon. They are the thing. Games are an index, or they're a barometer, or they are some sort of measure of the formation of culture around them. And each of these 3 people give radically different answers to what that looks like, but that's a shared belief here. They tell you something. And of course, I can't say that without bringing up good old Frederick Jameson, whose whole project for a very long time, through several masterworks of philosophy, was trying to work through, not trying, but working through this exact position over and over and over and over again in order to understand the relationship between how we experience a kind of aesthetic fold of society in the object. So for him, it was most often the novel, occasionally the film. But how does that object contain evidence of its production culture and the economic system around it and the values and valorizations that surround those things? So what do people care about and how do they sequence those things? So I think that's shared between all these folks. So we have our kind of homegrown, for lack of a better example, right? Our versions of this, and then obviously there's a much bigger tradition around this that I think Jameson's emblematic of, but is not the whole deal. So when I'm thinking about conspiracy, I'm thinking about it in those terms, right? So I'm taking sort of the precepts or the ideas that come out of game studies around how do you talk to images, text, all this kind of stuff. How do you take games as evidence of the world of something that is kind of enfolding the world that we live in? And I really take Jenny Rice's book Awful Archives, which I'm showing here, to be critical for that and really useful for that. Jenny Rice works through, I think there's 4 case studies in the book And they're all just about different conspiracies. But the big argument I think that Rice produces that is really helpful is that the sum total of evidence, so the archive itself, when people point to the immense amount of posts about QAnon, right, or Q drops or whatever, or when they say, well, I don't know, there are whole TikTok accounts dedicated to this phenomenon, so maybe there's something there. Pointing to the bundle or the mass or the big archive itself, that becomes the persuasive act. That is rhetoric itself, is her argument, that the size and scope and scale of the thing is evidence of something. And then conspiracy theory, and the way that conspiracy theory asks us to engage with it, these kind of subjugated knowledges of conspiracy, where they see themselves as under attack and as being kind of secondary. So they have to prove themselves all the time. They look at that big bundle and they kind of weave their way through it in order to prove themselves over and over again. That to me sounds like a massive video game franchise, right? So the Assassin's Creed games say there are these assassins and Templars. They've been fighting for millennia. They are the outcropping of these precursor species. They're all crammed together. They're all doing all these different things. And then each game kind of chooses its own maneuver through that, the weave. And then the fandom is left to engage with that and to think about how to do fan theorization. In the book, I talk, I think I talk both in the introduction and also in the acknowledgments, I think, about, I think the book might have been impossible to do without the fan wikis. I know there's a footnote about it as well, that the fan wikis that draw the connection. So, I play these games, I take really good notes. I played through all the games twice just for this book. I did all this work, thousands of hours of just playing. When I added it all up, I was like, what have I done with my life? But even with that, I would have these kind of connections where I go, how are those really related? And then I would have to go watch a YouTube video, or I would have to go look at the fan wiki to figure out how do they fit together. And as soon as you do that, you expose yourself to an immense amount of fan theorization and linkage, right? That all these things go together. And so that's what I end up arguing in the chapter, is that conspiracy is one of the mechanisms to draw you into a kind of franchise fandom. That the thing that Jenny Rice holds on to and points out as part of the formal concerns of UFO conspiracies, QAnon, things like that, it is mirrored perfectly over in the Assassin's Creed fandom because of how they present you with all this information, then ask you to navigate it yourself and interweave it. And some things are more verified, some things are less verified. There are all these hints toward possible futures. And so I think that's one of the things that happens. So I have to look for these big ideas that would allow me to speak across all those different parts of Assassin's Creed. And that begins, right, with, this is Assassin's Creed 2. Yeah, Assassin's Creed 2. It's like a bad YouTube clip that snipping tool that I pulled here. It starts relatively innocently, and also this is basically just a history of what you've done in the game so far. There's not, in Assassin's Creed 2, there's not a lot of like choosing your next victim or anything like that in the game. So you just kind of bebop back and forth through the game, and you can check your conspirators to see how far in the game am I, all that kind of stuff. What do I know about these characters? And then this is Valhalla. Yeah, this is Valhalla, where it then becomes a provocation to engage with the world. So we were thinking all the way back. Sorry, I'm flipping through. We're thinking about these things when you write about games. What are you responsible to? It goes from being conspiracy just being a checklist to, or a kind of mark of progress, to being the checklist, which is to say, it is a measure of the amount of interaction you've done with the world. And in the book, I kind of link this up with some other stuff going on around time on device, and how the Assassin's Creed games and Ubisoft as a developer and publisher is measuring, both bookings and how long you're spending in these games. There is something going on with the competition for your time, and Assassin's Creed, every single one of these games is competing not just with other games, but they're competing with your phone. They're competing with TV. They're competing with all this stuff. As one of my favorite films, Blackberry says, there's only 1 minute in a minute, and so the competition there matters a lot. So conspiracy then moves from being a quality of the games or a narrative quality or whatever, and it becomes a formal structure that stretches across the franchise, and not just a structure that determines what is in the game, but it structures how you interact with the world and how you interact with these games and how you interact with the franchise. And so I found that really interesting. And that's what I ended up writing the big chapter on. And all the chapters, I think, work that way, which is to say they take a notion that is omnipresent in these games and flesh it out, and then flesh it out again, and then flesh it out again, and then hopefully produce a kind of bigger insight about how we engage with it. And I hope, my desire, and people have said I've succeeded so far, so that's felt pretty good. But that's not academic inside baseball. It's not the way I'm accomplishing that. Is hopefully by just doing explication. And of course, as I write about in the book, what's notable is when you start doing research on these things is you start seeing people who just go, I don't know, I think I just joined the Templars, or I don't know, do you think this conspiracy is real? And it's hard to know sometimes. Is this trolling? Is this people making content for content's sake? It's hard to know about what the world is shaped like and what the intentions of people who talk on the internet are. So I'm not saying that like Assassin's Creed makes conspiracy theorists, but I will tell you this is in the conclusion to the book. Doing work on this book functionally ruined every algorithm I have on any algorithmically generated website. I use Facebook to make professional posts occasionally and mostly to keep up with my family members. It's basically all I use it for. The other thing I use it for is to see algorithmically produced stuff about conspiracy theories that I apparently believe in because I've been looking all of this stuff up for so long. Ancient aliens, you start looking at that stuff, boy howdy, they assume you're a type of guy, right? So there's a way that this is kind of a funnel, intentionally or not. It funnels you into other ways that this shows up. This is what I was talking about before. All right, last thing to say, and then I'm done. Is that I think that I'm moving over into, I'm finishing this Magic the Gathering book, which is, I would say, in shape and scope and notion and thought, very similar to the Assassin's Creed book. I'm approaching Magic the way I approach Assassin's Creed, which is like, what does it have? What does it do? How does it engage with the stuff? But I'm really engaged and by the work of Beverly Houston and Marcia Kinder. Marcia Kinder wrote a book on video games, on early video games in the early 90s. And it's an underread book of game studies. People should check it out. It's about that in children's television. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles get a really cool chapter. We did it for Game Study Buddies, who can listen to our episode on it. But it made me realize that she did all this other work with Beverly Houston around what they call transformalist criticism, which is about, essentially, it's early affect studies or an early version of that, of thinking about high formalism within media objects, particularly games and cinema, but then also what are the other elements that are a part of that, and how does it direct you to look at particular formal elements? So, for example, for them, they're very interested in not how does form produce emotion, but when one has an emotion, what form are you then brought into? How does it shape you? How does it do stuff to you? How does it make you look at particular things in the world? And that, I think, Assassin's Creed book, I wasn't really aware of any of this work from the two of them, like the specific work they did together. I wasn't really aware of it when I was working on the Assassin's Creed book, but after the fact, I've become really interested in doing this kind of stuff. And so I have another project after the Magic book that I'm very slowly kind of working notes on for, about how games visualize the world. And I think that Houston and Kinder are my way of taking the way I thought about the world in Assassin's Creed, the way I thought about the world in this Magic book, and then doing something slightly different with it. And so if there's a little preview for what I'm doing after this point, it probably lies in the few things that these two folks did with one another. So I strongly encourage people to check it out. I think all of their work is out of print together, so good luck. I've got my copies, so good luck fighting over those on Abe Books or whatever. And I talked longer than I intended to, but there we go. This is information where you can find me, and we can do some Q&A. Yeah.
Okay, here we are. Amazing, everybody. Cameron, thank you so much for that. There's also like a side chat going on in in the ROMchip Discord about everyone's favorite Assassin's Creed that I'm trying to pay attention to. So first of all, I want to thank everybody in the chat. Through Cameron's many excellent marketing tricks, we have gotten up to 21% of our goal. $1447.50. Thank you so much, everybody. That is
thanks,
amazing,
everybody.
amazing. A lot of great questions in the chat, and I'm going to go through kind of as many of them as I can.
Yeah.
But yeah, first I want to say I was really personally kind of just like motivated and thoughtful about your discussion of a larger community, of discovering through like study buddies this idea of a larger community that wants to be part of an intellectual project that is not necessarily the idea of like a disciplinary specialist or a quote unquote academic. I think, you know, in part because I think that's one of the things we've been, you know, so gratified to see in taking ROMchip kind of like public. I think we had a hunch that there was a community like that there for game history. But also there was, you know, I think it was so much bigger than we even realized it can be. And so now we are also in this, kind of have this amazing opportunity to, you know, I think everyone in this chat and so many of the people who return over and over and over again actually are often our most frequent donors are not academics, right? The people who are most enthusiastic are not necessarily like, you know, historians with a capital H. And that's exactly what we want to be doing, right? So to get to some of the questions, I might try to kind of bring together questions that are a little similar. MA Fonts 01 asked, considering that your book explores several approaches to games, could you tell us a bit about your experience with peer review? And then also kind of a disciplinary question, sort of, Peking_O asked, how much fan studies literature did you engage in when using and thinking through fan-produced work like the wikis and YouTube explainer videos?
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself a fan studies person. And really, a lot of working on this book. I mean, to be clear, I took coursework in fan studies. You know, I'm familiar enough with it and knew what to do when I started running into the issues with it. Because my primary site of research wasn't, you know, the fan studies work. It was more becoming a user of the resources rather than, you know, trying to think deeply about why the wiki was shaped the way it was or why certain podcasts are more prominent than others. I didn't really feel like I needed to engage heavily citationally with that work. So I mean, the answer is I read fan studies work, but I wouldn't say I was citing it heavily in the book. Because in some ways I was engaging with it in the way that like a regular human being would, right? Not as an object of study, but as a resource. And that's an interesting thing, and maybe goes into the other question that was asked here too, right? About peer review, which is, I think I had to be very explicit in peer review, and for everything I've done, I've had to be very explicit in peer review because a lot of the stuff that I write for academic venues is of this shape, right? So it's written in a particular way. I kind of take on a voice that I have in academic writing, which is sometimes hyper formal and then sometimes not formal at all. And I bounce back and forth between those modes. I'm heavily influenced, like in my heart, right? And deep in my heart, I'm like a media philosophy person. That's like where I live. And so sometimes I write in that mode too. And that's not a mode that is valorized. As much as we like to pretend it like, you know, the world of highfalutin theory or whatever, you start doing that stuff and people don't always like it, which is fair, right? Like it's what peer review's for. It's for getting feedback. And so my experience with peer review is often across the board, some version of this is not written in the way that is correct. And then I have to like negotiate that and figure it out, which is fine, whatever. It's what peer review is. And then some of the peer review that I get back, and I don't mean this in a negative way at all, you know, what I'm about to say, but some of the peer review I get back for work that is in this zone, sometimes doesn't get the point, which is to say it is evaluating what I'm interested in up against like the very incremental work of academic disciplines, which are very valuable and I would never be critical of, but that's not the exact thing that I am after. And so sometimes I get really positive peer review and it's awesome and really good. I've received peer review before that has literally said, this happened for the Magic book. I've talked about this in a bunch of places, but the peer review for the initial proposal said, this is a really great idea. This is a book that's impossible to write. This is just not a book. And so
I
was
had
like,
someone say that about my dissertation.
yeah. So, and that's fair. Like again, I don't mean that negatively, right? That's someone giving their honest expert opinion. Their feedback was good. Like that was not a thing, but also at the same time, I was like, well, I'm writing this kind of book right now. So I know it's possible because I'm doing it. It's being published. So, but if you don't have that, right. And look, I've written hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words for publication before, right? Not academically. My academic CV is fairly short. But in terms of, I know how to write things that people will read. I have a strong sense of that. And I do have in me, like, well, enough people have published me before that I know that somewhere in my heart, I have good instincts. And if I don't have good instincts, I have a lot of people I can talk to that can tell me, hey, look, this is a bad idea or this is a good idea. I trust my editors. Like, I've been incredibly privileged to work with some of the most talented academic and non-academic editors running around in the world. Like, I've been incredibly, unbelievably privileged with that. And so part of it's that is like peer review is a thing that matters a lot. And obviously that's people getting to tell you yes or no. But on the other side of that is, I think it's very valuable to have a cohort of people you can ask, do I have good ideas or bad ideas? And part of that too is them telling you, well, this might not be a good fit for XYZ, but it might be a great fit for ABC. So yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, I've had as many issues with peer review as any other human being ever has. And I think sometimes they're unique ones. But that's not, everyone's had issues with peer review. So yeah.
I'm going to ask two questions that I think are both about how the kind of franchise nature of Assassin's Creed impacts the output in various ways. So Lucas Rizzoli asked, how does ownership of Assassin's Creed, especially its changing hands, right now co-owned, Tencent, Ubisoft, chains or resonate with aspects of the games as conspiracy tales or being about control or freedom, kind of as discussed in the book? How is that like or unlike Magic the Gathering and its changing ownership? So there's kind of like a relationship between ownership and kind of content structure. And then Obscuratory or Phil Salvador asks, has the aggressive franchising of Assassin's Creed had an effect on the themes of the series? The back-to-back yearly releases over a whole decade affected the perception, but I don't know if that aggressive development cycle affected the thematic cohesion of the series.
Yeah, I mean, those are both, I think, really interesting questions. For the changing hands question, that's a little hard to answer right now because in terms of the best way to ascertain that, I think, is either through the incredibly oblique statements of the Ubisoft executive suite.
Yeah. What's happening?
Which are truly bizarre every time, right? And they say things, right? Like when a CEO is speaking, this is a thing that's like helpful for everyone to know. When a CEO is speaking, you're reading a press release, right? Like every time, every word that is out of their mouth is representative. It's the king's two bodies, right? Like there's the monetary thing that goes up and down, and that's one body, and the other is the mouth of this like weird puppet that the company has chosen to speak for itself, right?
Yes.
It's the real mouth of Sauron kind of thing going on. And so, but I gotta tell you, when the Ubisoft people talk, it's not like anyone else talking. It's really strange. And so sometimes I think you can glean what their priorities are and the way that they're thinking about their products actually through them. They are some of the most authentic and authentically weird sounding executives I've ever encountered. So that's one of them. The other one is the investor reports, which is always, how does this institution speak to itself to legitimate its own existence? And so I don't really know. I mean, the thing that we've seen over the past couple of weeks, right, is the massive cuts. They've just killed a whole bunch of in-development projects that were unannounced, and then several that have been announced. The Prince of Persia the Prince of Persia remake that they were doing has been canceled. So the answer there is I don't know, and I also don't know if the narrative stuff has changed too much either. And so to go to the second question, I think actually the aggressive release schedule made Assassin's Creed more coherent than it would otherwise have been. because I think the really fast schedule meant that there were a set of core principles that they were attached to that they just kept repeating over and over again. And so I think that those are actually much more coherent because there's not a lot of room for switching up midstream. Ubisoft is also different from many other companies with the whole editorial board structure, right? I mean, they have a whole group of people whose whole job is to go around and evaluate the different franchise entries for coherence to the whole. They've had, whatever, 3 different people at least who have been the kind of IP director who, these people who are just responsible for narrative coherence and the franchising so that the comics match up with the stuff. And I write about this in the book. There's some weird stuff that's happened with these games around that release pace and around changing midstream that have been bizarre and unlike any other company, right? So
interesting. I mean, that speaks directly to what was described in the chat as a shots fired question by Professor Zagal, Jose Zagal. And I think this will be my last question. Where he asked, I may have misunderstood parts of your talk, but is it realistic to assume the corpus of the games is coherent?
I mean, I don't. That's a real philosophical question of is it coherent or not? Yeah, of course. I mean, like there's a part of me like inside that goes, yes, of course it is, because like human beings, by
in your
virtue
heart,
of,
you know this.
Yeah, in my heart, I know this because for 2 reasons. One is that the purpose of franchises is to generate coherence, right? The purpose of the franchise is to take things that are disparate in time and to bring them into coherence to sell them on the market. Right. The fan wikis wouldn't exist if it weren't coherent. And the reason it becomes coherent is we can make it coherent, whether or not it inherently is. I mean, I think we have to, if we begin to question, is it coherent or not, which I think is always a secondary function rather than a primary function. But if we say, is it primarily coherent? No, because nothing that human beings experience phenomenologically, I think, is. So then it's, what are the flavors of secondary coherence, right? Like, how does one, and I'm just repeating Frederick Jameson. This is not me, right? Like, I'm just repeating good old Fred that I showed up earlier, right? But yes, we do it. And it's against a backdrop of particular economic conditions, particular political conditions. And so the way that it's drawn into closure, the way the franchise is made whole every minute of experience for both the company and for fans, that's the thing. Like, that's the juice of culture, right? That's welcome to Stuart Hall, right? Like, that's his whole deal. How did that happen? And so I mean, I think it's a really good question. It's a philosophical question, but I think I have like a very naive answer, which is everything is always brought into coherence. The question for me is, what are the mechanisms of coherence and who gets to tell you they are and how do they do it that way?
Yeah, I think I may have misrepresented Jose So in the chat. Like, this is what I meant. Less shots fired for you and more shots fired at Assassin's Creed, I think.
Ooh, get them. Oh, look, Jose, you can email me. Look, let's co-author a thing. I'm glad to make that happen.
You're saying this is a tough problem, right? Yeah. Is it worth hanging your hat on the position this is coherent? I think there's plenty of franchises that aren't, and fans negotiate that.
Yeah.
Like, they need to hit enough in terms of recognizability, but overall coherence matters less, but that probably goes back to the same kind of set of your way of approaching that question approaches merges into a meta level, right? Which is like, things are coherent by the nature of human perception to some extent, right? Well.
Yeah, I don't. Yes, yeah. I take the Gibsonian approach almost in some ways, right? Of like, I don't know, like the rabbit looks at the field differently than I look at the field, and so the differential there is like the project of analyzing human culture, right? But I don't know. Yeah, Jose, email me. Let's figure it out.
Do you get a question often about your favorite Assassin's Creed game?
Yeah, every single time. Yeah, and also, have you played the most recent one? That's the other question.
I have not. Shadow? No.
Yeah, me neither. No, I burned out. I really have experienced significant burnout with these games. I cannot bring myself to do it. Like, it's a real. I've thought about writing just about that, about how I cannot bring myself to install the game. Like, I have a real physical, emotional block around it. It's really weird. Never had that happen before for anything.
The chat agrees that you are not the only one, but having shot yourself through the sluice of the franchise, that would make a lot of sense. We are a little bit after time, so I am going to cut everyone loose with this just kind of wrap up statement. First of all, Cameron, everybody in the chat, give Cameron a big thank you again. This talk was so fun. Thank you for bringing some of the Range Touch community and the Study Buddies community into kind of connection with the ROMchip community. If you believe in what ROMchip is doing, you can head to donate.romchip.org and make a contribution. Every gift, no matter the size, brings us closer to that $7,000 goal to keep us open access, independent, and awesome. Early donors get swag and a shout out. And second, mark your calendars. There is more of this coming. February 6th, Rayford Gwynns will be talking about the game of Pong, right? And February 13th, Carlin Wing will be delivering a book talk about the book I have awarded Best Weirdest Take of 2026, is her book on the history of bounce. That will be followed the next week by our all-day Twitch fundraiser, February 21st. Our newsletter, I will drop that in the chat right now. Never miss an update. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Game on.